Babe, you know Santa and Satan have the same letters. Am I right?
Oh my gosh. Sure, yeah, let's get into that. Hey everyone, I'm Andrea.
I'm Nathan.
And you've joined us for Family Friday on the Marriage by Design podcast. And this is a time where we get to talk to you about God's design for families and how we practically live that out. And this is one of our Christmas episodes. So we are donning our lovely Christmas attire. I'm in they're not footy. I'm in a onesie pajama thing with mistletoe on the top of my hood. Yes.
Nice. Yeah, and I'm rocking my Santa jumpsuit like I'm at a Jersey.
I'll put my head down though so that it's not super distracting to...
Man, thanks guys so much for joining us. As Andrea mentioned, this is one of our Christmas episodes, so we're doing a whole month talking about various aspects of the Christmas holiday, which is upcoming. Last week we talked about de-stressing the Christmas season, what that can look like, deep breaths all around. This week we're going to talk a little bit more about what do we take away as a family from the Christmas season. What's our responsibility as parents with regards to the things that we teach our kids? We'll share openly with you guys about how we look at the Christmas season. What are the things that we try to teach our kids? And dare I say, some of you who think you know us may walk away from this thinking otherwise. Because we do look at Christmas a little bit maybe different than, other Christian families do. So that's what we're going to talk about. So the flow of the episode today is we're going to talk a little bit about just the Christmas season generally. Like, should we even be celebrating that at all as Christians? And then we're going to take a look at a few specific Christmas-related aspects and talk about those things. And yes, if you are here to see us talk about Santa, we are going to talk about Santa a little further on in the episode, so hang on for that. So before we dive into Christmas, I thought it would be appropriate to maybe give a little bit of background about what Christmas is. As you guys know, if you've watched many of these episodes, I'm kind of a history guy. I enjoy stories and lore, and I enjoy knowing the backdrop of things that we celebrate. And so it was not too terribly long ago that I started looking into, well, what is the backdrop of Christmas? Because if we look at the Bible, which is always the best place to start, if we look at the Gospels, particularly you can look at the Gospel of Luke, you can see what we in the Christian community consider the Christmas story, right? Mary and Joseph are recalled to his hometown of Bethlehem for a census. There's no room at the inn, right? And they get stuck in a manger, stuck in a stable.
Stuck in the manger.
Hopefully Jesus did not get stuck in the manger. They got stuck in a stable, which was essentially, we think of it as this beautiful wood-carved farm building.
That would be nice.
It was not that. It was essentially a cave that was in all likelihood dug into the side of a hill with a bunch of animals in it. And they end up clearing out what was essentially a food trough. And she had Jesus there in that stable and laid him in that manger. Now, here's the problem. Shortly after that, in the Gospel of Luke, it talks about the angels went to the shepherds. Do you remember what the shepherds were doing?
They were just doing their shepherding sheepy thing.
That's right. The Bible says they were keeping watch over their flock
by night.
By night. That's right. Well, if you look at Jewish culture, the keeping over your flocks by night usually ends by about the beginning to mid-October because of the weather, right? I mean, it's Israel's northern hemisphere, so it's cold. At night. So for the shepherds to be out in the later evening hours keeping watch over their flocks indicates would not have been late December when Jesus was born. More likely than that was probably much earlier in the year in the summer, right? Sometime in that summer season. So Knowing that, how did we end up celebrating Jesus' birth on the 25th of December? Well, in order to know...
You're saying that wasn't the day he was born?
That was not the day he was born.
The exact day was not December 25th?
Spoiler. That was the day he was born. Get in your own gospel and tell me where I'm wrong. No, so the question then comes up, well, why do we celebrate that? Well, the answer to that really is a little more complicated than that, in that you need to have an understanding a little bit of the flow of history during the time of the early church. Mm-hmm. So Jesus comes down to earth as a babe, not on December 25th, unfortunately, and lives the perfect life, 33 years, is killed, tragically, crucified, amazingly, praise the Lord, raised from the dead for all of our salvation, ascends into heaven, and his apostles, his disciples, start the early church. Mm-hmm. You can go to Acts to see a lot of the escapades of the early church, as well as what the early church and our church now was meant to look like. So the early church begins, and during that time, some of the most horrific human beings ever to walk the planet were in power in Rome. The chief sort of murderer of which was a man named Nero. Now, you can go study tons of stuff about Nero. A lot of it is morbidly fascinating, but he had a overt hatred for, well, humanity really generally, but particularly Christians. Mm-hmm. And as you read, things about him, you quickly will realize he's in a category of, Ted Bundy and these guys where they were just Charles Manson, those guys where you start to read about them and you go, okay, this guy just not all the screws were coming together. That's how Nero was. I mean, he did things like hang Christians from pikes along the street and light them on fire to light the street. These were things that he did and took pleasure in doing, because he was psychotic.
Right.
And so immediately the church is in this position of undergoing this horrible persecution. The disciples are all killed, martyred for their faith, not necessarily all by him, but all martyred in that time frame, including Paul, not one of the disciples, but an apostle in the early church, is martyred as well under Nero, and just this horrible, horrible situation. Nero eventually dies, and after him is a man named Constantine, who comes to power in Rome. Now, Constantine had this great unification idea where he was going to go from persecuting Christians through a series of circumstances, which I'd encourage you to read about because it's fascinating. He goes from wanting to make enemy of this growing Christian group that's spreading throughout Rome, right? Because if there's one thing that will spread an idea, it's banning it.
Yep.
And you can see that throughout American history, throughout world history. You want something to grow, ban it. And then
Constantine.
So Constantine goes, well, instead of banning this, because it's growing by leaps and bounds anyway, I will embrace it. Mm-hmm. But here was the problem, and this is a good thing for us to consider as Christians. As he didn't accept Christianity the way that Jesus Christ taught Christianity. He wanted to integrate Christianity into the greater Roman culture. And so what you had was this meshing together of the polytheistic Roman culture with the monotheistic Christian culture, right? Polytheistic meaning many gods, monotheistic meaning one God. So what ended up happening, to bring this full circle, is the Romans already had a celebration that they celebrated at the end of the year. It was one of their biggest festivals. Happened in about the 4th week of December, always aligned with the winter solstice. Mm-hmm. The Romans were big on death and rebirth. And this particular festival was the festival where they celebrated the death of this year's sun and the rebirth of next year's sun. And that coincided with the winter solstice. And so as they would go out and have this huge celebration to celebrate essentially the end of one year and the beginning of another year, the newly formed sort of Roman Christians, right, who were good-intentioned people, but didn't have a full appreciation for the gospel as it was meant to be understood, they had this great idea. Well, wait, but in late December, the Romans are already celebrating the birth of the Son, so why not just combine into this the birth of the Son?
S-O-N.
And they're already in Roman culture coinciding with this festival. There was the mother giving birth to the son, right? Meaning literally the son, but they also had God names for these, the mother and the son. And so it fit perfectly well. And so they merged this celebration of the birth of Christ into the celebration that they already had, that perpetuated on throughout history and to this day is celebrated coinciding with the winter solstice.
Yep.
Now we put it on December 25th every year, and that's the celebration of Christmas. So Christmas, not something that is mandated or hinted at in the Bible, the actual celebration of the day. But it is something that Christians globbed onto in the early Christian church in Rome, and it perpetuated itself over time and ties into, there's Germanic celebrations, it didn't matter where in the world you were, almost every culture celebrated something around the winter solstice because it was this amazing natural event that happened. Yep. And so because of that, Christmas, really caught on over the years. So with that history then in mind, the question I think we have to ask ourselves, even initially, and maybe this will be a really short episode, is it even right for us to celebrate Christmas, understanding that it really doesn't have any basis in the birth of Christ? That was something that was put on it after the fact. Is it right to do that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question to ask, and there's nothing in the Bible that says anything about Christmas, like Nathan was saying. There's also nothing in the Bible that says that we need to have a celebration for the birth of Christ.
That's right.
So thinking about those things, is it right to celebrate Christmas? Well, there's nothing inherently bad about the Christmas, where it came from. Its beginnings and its background and all that, right?
Right. In fact, something you just said reminded me, I'd even go a step further to say, when you look at the early church, they did not celebrate births, period. They celebrated, there was a celebration that a new life was brought into the world, particularly if it was a boy. But the real celebration was upon the death of the Christian, because that, as the early church fathers understood, was really your birth into eternal life.
Interesting?
Yeah. So
man, that's bizarre to think of.
Right. So a lot of, there's recorded history of early church leaders in the Christmas era that thought this is not something we should be celebrating at all, because it was the death of Christ and ultimate resurrection that was the real miracle, not the birth.
That's interesting. So yeah, thinking back on the beginnings of Christmas and the history of it, there's nothing bad about it. There's nothing behind it that's evil or anything like that. So what are the things that we think of when we think of Christmas? Well, we think of gifts and gatherings and generosity and family time and memories and all that sort of thing, and Santa.
That's right.
We think of and magic. We think of all that. And there are a lot of those pieces that for us as Christians, and of course we think of Jesus' birth. Sorry, left that out.
Yeah, totally.
You'll find out later why that was, maybe skip my mind for a second. But we think about all those things when we think of Christmas, right? Yep. And those are all, a lot of those things, other than the magic, I would say, are good things, fun things, and things that some of those are in the Bible. the gathering together,
Yep.
that's a biblical thing, and it's an important thing.
Gifts.
The feasting is another biblical important thing that we'll talk about. Gifts, important. Generosity, talked about in the Bible. So there are some big pillars of Christmas that are also big pillars of the Bible and of the Christian life. And so to bring those into Christmas it's a great opportunity to bring a lot of those Christian beliefs into Christmas, and to celebrate those things. So I think it's a great thing to celebrate Christmas and to celebrate it in a lot of the same ways that, quote, the world celebrates it too, with the gifts and the feasting and all that, so that we're having all of these memories made. We're spending time together.
Yeah.
We're reflecting on the things that the Lord has done in our lives and the things that the Lord has done for us, and we're taking the time to do that. Those are all things that Christmas is about.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Paul's words that are oft quoted within Christian circles that say, all things are lawful, but not all things are beneficial.
Yep.
And we talk about that sometimes with regards to things like alcohol and these things where it's like, well, they're not necessarily evil in and of themselves, but it's our use and attitudes towards them that make them potentially sinful. And I think the same thing is true with Christmas. I love Christmas. If any of you guys that know me, I'm a giant Christmas fan. There's two things I love: Disney, everything, and Christmas.
Oh, you heathen!
That's right. And I love it. And, it's the fun of it and the excitement that surrounds the whole, once I see a gingerbread boy or Christmas songs are on the radio, man, I'm all in. I love it. And, as I've wrestled with that over the years, for me, I really don't feel like that's, and for our family, I don't feel like that's wrong.
Right.
But here's what I think you and I have come to on this. And here's another thing. If you're watching this and you go, you know what, my wife and I felt totally convicted that we should have nothing to do with Christmas, then here's what I would say to you. Much like I would say to the guy who says, you know what, I feel like I should, the Lord told me I need to never have a drop of alcohol in my life, I'd say if you were to drink, that would be a sin for you.
Right.
Because the Lord's told you not to do it.
Right. We're just giving our perspective and
that's right.
where we feel like the Lord has brought us in regards to Christmas.
That's right. And that really brings me to the point I want to challenge y'all that are watching this in is at least do the legwork of talking and thinking about these things as a couple.
Yep.
For your family. Because what we didn't want to do is just go along because that's what you do.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you do Christmas because that's what you do. You do Christmas.
So we've been married for almost 15 years, and there's been 15 years worth of conversation
that's right.
for us about Christmas and what's right and what's not, and how do we view Christmas and how we do Christmas with our kids, and what's right in regards to Santa and all that sort of thing. I mean, we've had years
that's right.
of conversation, and it's only been in the last couple years, I feel like, that we've really sought the Lord on that and feel like God's brought us to a certain point in that journey.
Totally. So what's the point? The point is that I don't believe Christmas as a thing is wrong.
No.
I think that Christmas can be a really important time for your family of relaxing as a family and being knit together as a family. I also think we in 2020 plus need to be so diligent about being intentional in how we approach Christmas.
That's constantly it seems to be our constant battle cry.
That's right.
Is intentionality.
Yeah.
But that's throughout all of life.
That's right.
It's so important to be intentional, because if you're not, you're going to end up someplace you don't even recognize.
That's right. But as the world gets smaller with the internet and other things, our level of diligence needs to continue to go up and up and up and up, because the world's got a lot to say about Christmas, and as with anything, but it's not speaking anymore, it's shouting.
Right.
And if we're not intentional as parents, we're going to get lost amongst the world shouting at our kids around us and shouting at our family around us.
Yep.
So what we decided to do is just pop through. I think we've got six different things that are kind of Christmas related things.
Hallmarks.
As we talked through, man, what would we love to get out to y'all without taking 2.5 hours for an episode, to just talk about. These are some hallmarks of Christmas. What do we think about those things? So the 6 things that we're going to talk about are gifts, feasts or gatherings, magic, Santa, celebrations, and then abiding in Christ. We're going to kind of combine those last 2 as kind of our final word on the matter.
Great.
So to kick off, babe, gifts.
Yes.
So everybody knows, right? Christmas, you get gifts.
Hey-o.
Right? And forever, it has been the plight of the Christian parent to try and refocus our kids from just thinking about gifts to thinking about the birth of Christ. And it seems like we come up with all sorts of fancy slogans like, it's not about the presents.
It's about his presence.
Oh, isn't that sweet? It just makes me want to
Or like
punch
Jesus
myself in
only
the
got
face.
3 gifts, so we're going to give 3 gifts.
Sure,
kind of
yeah,
thing, you
right.
know?
And there are all
There's
sorts of
definitely people that
strategies
do that.
for doing this, for sure. So, babe, talk about how do we think about gifts come Christmas?
Right. So, gifts, especially for kids, are a super exciting part of Christmas. And we really struggled for a long time with like, but the focus is really supposed to be on Jesus' birth, right? But yet our kids are like trying to lie to themselves that they're not excited for gifts, but they really are. And that's kind of what Christmas ends up being for them, is like all the other stuff other than Jesus' birth. And they're like, I mean, yeah, that's great about Jesus' birth, but it's Christmas,
Right.
So the gifts part is a great thing. I think it's a great thing about Christmas. We, the Bible talks a ton about generosity and about really having the mindset of my money and the things that I have are the Lord's, and allowing him to use those things. We talked about tithe too, but just about being generous outside of tithe. In fact, there's a Proverb 11:24-25 that says, "One gives freely, yet grows all the richer." And I will say, I don't think that necessarily means in money. But you
totally
can be
agree with
rich
that.
in a lot of things that are better than money.
Yep.
Another withholds what he should give and only suffers want. Whoever brings blessing will be enriched, and one who waters will himself be watered. I love that, because it's all about give freely, and God will bless you. And again, not necessarily in monetary ways. Maybe that's true, but there's greater things than being blessed in monetary ways. So it's a blessing to him if we choose to give freely. And gifts are a way to do that. So gifts for our kids don't come in very often. They get basically their birthday and Christmas to get gifts. We don't give them a whole lot outside of
that.
Yeah, it's a pretty rare moment if they get something outside of either birthday or Christmas. So Christmas is a super fun time to like really pursue their hearts and their interests, and then kind of lavish on them some gifts. We're not, I mean, we don't go like all out crazy, but lavish for them is like a few gifts, because that's not normal for them.
That's right.
So we get to give freely to them and enjoy watching them, relish that. And that's a fun thing as a parent, and it's not wrong. It's not wrong to enjoy giving gifts to your kids and see them love opening them and love the gift, the receiving part of that. God has put in us a piece that loves to receive blessing. And he's also put in us a part that enjoys blessing.
Yep.
And pursues blessing other people. And so both of those things go hand in hand at Christmas time.
Right, and practically we use that as an opportunity to really bring the kids together. We spend a lot of time where they're sitting in front of a magazine together, flipping through it and circling things that they would love to have.
And we spend a lot of time with them doing that, because then I get to learn maybe, they're super interested in this and I had no idea.
That's right.
Or they're just it's being involved in their excitement of what's out there,
Exactly right. That's exactly right. So, the other side of that is we really try to enforce with them too the importance of being generous with others this time of year. And, you know, we try to do that throughout the year as well, but there's a special, it clicks in their mind in a special way, I think, this time of year, as, you know, the whole world around you changes into this Christmas celebratory spirit, where it can sink in a little bit more to be on the lookout, you know, encouraging our kids, hey, be on the lookout for other people that can be blessed, right? That we can go out and bless, or doing Operation Christmas Child if you like to do that as a family.
Yeah, there's you know, all sorts of opportunities out there, and I would encourage you to look for those to involve your kids, but also look for them throughout the year, not just Christmas. Some things that we've done in the past is Operation Christmas Child. I think one thing that really hit it home is some years we've had Jackson has been the only one that's old enough, but we've had him work for the money to use to fill up those shoe boxes. And I think that has helped to really hit it home, like how much it costs to put the things in those. And then we'll fill some too alongside of him. But for him doing his own, realizing, gosh, there is a cost to this. This isn't just mom and dad's money, but I had to work to do this, and I'm working to bless somebody else.
Right.
And I loved that. Right. And then we've done kind of there was a this kind of event we did one time where we were kind of like making pre-made soup, and Jackson was doing that with us, and you know, for a food pantry type thing. There's all sorts of things you can volunteer at a homeless shelter. You know, tons of things you can do. Yeah,
which is a great opportunity to help our kids to understand, whatever age they are, that you're super blessed by the home that the Lord chose to put you in.
Yeah.
And for us to be able to really focus in on some other people that, you know, have come upon rough times, or, you know, aren't blessed like we're blessed, you know, that's an important thing. And why is that an important thing? Because at the end of the day, that's exactly what Christ did for us. Right? He was God. Right? John 1:1, in the beginning, Christ was there. Yet he did not view equality with God as something to be grasped, but chose humanity so that he could come down and rescue us. It's easy in this time of year to present that gospel message to your kids, right? Yeah, it's not the little cute baby in the manger, but it's really the story of Christ's sacrifice and generosity for even me.
Yep.
Right? Even while I should have been on the naughty list, right? Christ chose to come down and give to me freely.
Yep. Yeah, so gifts are a great thing. They're something we super enjoy about Christmas, and especially with kids, and seeing, you know, the excitement in their faces, and that Christmas morning thing that we do.
That's right.
It's a fun thing. It's actually a biblical thing, and we get to tie that in.
That's right. So, babe, tell me about feasts.
Yeah, so we can see feasting is something that we do well, but it's also something we do, you know, think about all the holidays. Let's start with Easter, all the major holidays. Easter, and then what?
Ham,
yeah. And then Labor Day and Memorial Day and 4th of July. It's usually like you're getting together and having a meal, right?
Hot dogs.
Of hot dogs or hamburgers, cooking out. And then, you know, Thanksgiving. Turkey or ham or whatever. And then Christmas.
Hot dogs.
I guess Nathan likes hot dogs. I didn't know that. We don't have hot dogs at Christmas.
No, we don't. We have brisket, and it's amazing.
But we see a lot of feasting in our own holidays. Yeah. And feasting was something that we can see in the Bible, too. So in the Old Testament, there were a lot of celebratory feasts, banquets, and a lot of those were commanded by the Lord.
That's right.
As remembering his faithfulness for his people.
That's right.
So there was, you know, when God brought the Israelites out of Egypt, he commanded that they remember that with a feast.
That's right.
So feasting is a thing that we, of course, do at Christmas, and maybe we do a little bit too much of it at Christmas, but it's a great time to gather together as family or family and friends or whatever.
Yep.
And just spend intentional time together, spend time remembering God's faithfulness, remembering the greatness of the Lord in our lives, and celebrating that, and celebrating we're here together, and celebrating your relationships.
That's right. When we look at feasts in the Bible and in Jewish culture, even up to today, the way that feasts were celebrated by the Jews in the Bible is you would sit down around this mat on the floor. You'd sit on the floor and kind of be lounging back. And they would have bowls of soups and salads and things like that sitting around, in the midst of you. And then they would pass around these big pieces of flat bread, right? And you would tear off a piece of the bread and you'd hand it to the person next to you and so on and so forth down the line. And then you would take your piece of bread and you would dip it in the soup and then eat it, or dip it in the salad and then eat it. And that's how you ate your meals. And there was no rules against double dipping, right, at the time.
Ew.
So when we look at, right, and I'm sure there are people that are like, okay, I'm totally cringed out right now.
I'm one of those people.
But think about how they thought and were taught by the Lord about meals together with other people. I mean, not to be graphic, but the point was at the end of the meal, your germs were my germs. And me and everyone else at that table. I mean, I was literally taking a part of you and putting it inside of my body. I mean, next to intimacy with the Lord and sexual intimacy with your spouse, that was as intimate as you could be with another human being. And so they saw these feasts and having other people into their home to share a meal with as about the most intimate thing you could do besides the Lord and your spouse.
Right.
And so there was this real, just continuous feeling of, man, let's have a feast together to celebrate, because it's it's the most intimate thing we can do together.
So close,
and we've lost that.
Yeah.
Right now it's like, even with friends, we've lost the art of hospitality in sharing a meal together, which is something that is very close to the Lord's heart.
No worries, friends. We won't be doing that type of feasting at our house, though, but we can still have intimate
creeps
time
people
together.
out. So Andrea usually spits in the food when she's making it, so that we have the same kind of thing going on. But yeah, feasting was super important. So the question is, how can we teach that intimacy to our kids?
And this is definitely an easy one to do, whereas the gifting isn't necessarily an easy one to do throughout the year. This is totally an easy one to do throughout the year. So having times during the year where you're choosing to spend intimate time with your family, like your nuclear family, around the dinner table, feasting together, talking about the Lord's faithfulness, what the Lord is teaching you, maybe what you're really struggling in, is super intimate time. And then choosing other times to bring other people into that as well. And I think one of the great things about, quote, feasts, banquets, meals, whatever, where you're choosing intentionally to sow into one another or into other people, is involving your kids in the process of making that too.
That's right.
Because again, it teaches them a lot of great life skills, but it also teaches them the sacrifice that it takes to provide a meal for somebody, and then the pride of serving that meal to somebody, and they're more invested in that, so that hopefully then they can replicate that as they get older. But it's a beautiful thing when we can get our kids into it too, and it kind of is a full circle of like, we're serving each other, and then we're also sitting down to enjoy that one together and enjoy God's faithfulness and God's love for us.
That's right. And the other thing we need to be teaching our kids that I think you can directly relate to this is how to share of yourself intimately in conversation.
Yeah.
How do I ask questions of another person that shows I care about their lives? How do I train my kids to not just be poking on their phones or their video games when there are other people around, particularly at meal times? But how do we create an atmosphere of intimacy amongst us as a family? Yeah, we don't share spit via the soup bowl anymore.
Thank goodness.
But how do we share intimacy around the table?
Right.
That's important, particularly this time of year.
So a great thing about the Christmas season is the intimate time we get to spend feasting, and then something that's very biblical as well.
That's right. So let's talk maybe briefly about magic. So, this is not, I know this magic probably isn't at the top of the list of things that people think about at this time of year, but it more and more has crept into being a reality of Christmas, right? We talk about the Christmas magic and, how does Santa fly? Well, magic. And how does Rudolph? Well, magic. And the elf on the shelf. And, all of these things, there's just this sort of, it's like the parent cop-out. Right, it's magic.
It's just magic, sure.
Right, that way I don't have to have a way to describe it. So anyway, babe, how do we think a little bit from a Christian standpoint about the magic of the season?
Right. So there's some that's just, I think we say magic maybe, and we just mean the feeling of Christmas,
Sure.
Which is fun.
Right.
But then I think we have to be careful about magic because, well, obviously magic is not real. That reminds me of a story.
Yes, we went to Disney and I did a package
of several years ago.
They were going to put a Tinkerbell. They were going to hide a blinking Tinkerbell in our room. This sounds really bad, actually. Now that I'm saying this, just take my word for it. It wasn't awkward or weird. They were going to hide a blinking Tinkerbell around the room, and she had to make a point.
The lady on the phone,
the Disney rep, had to make a point to tell me that Tinkerbell wasn't actually magic. She was battery operated.
I mean, she made the point like 3 times.
Yes, she did. And it was super awkward. So if you're planning on going, spoiler alert, Tinkerbell, not magic, battery operated.
Yes. So we know magic isn't real, right? It's a funny thing to talk about as an adult. Kids may believe in some magical things, especially in regards to Christmas and how Santa gets into houses and delivers all the gifts and all that sort of thing. And a lot of it really is innocent, but there is a fine line, I believe, between magic and the innocent magic, silly magic, and there is a reality of darkness in our world, which is evil.
Yeah.
And there can be a fine line there.
Magic comes up in the Bible fairly frequently.
Yeah,
I mean, particularly in the Old Testament, where there's just basically an outright ban on pursuing magic, pursuing, communing with, those that are dead and those types of things.
Spirits,
and there's a reason for that I'm sure you're going to read here in a second.
Right. Because it's so easy to blur that line and to cross the line, and we as Christians want to make sure we're staying far away from that line because that is not a place that we want to go. It's a dangerous place.
That's right.
Where you're entering in the dark forces of, the evil forces of the world that are very, very real. So the magic side of things, I mean, we don't make this big point in our house of like, did you just say magic? Don't say that.
Sure.
Our kids don't really we don't talk much about magic, but we're also not like on top of them saying, no, that's not magic, that's battery operated,
Right. But we have, to bring up just a specific modern day example, the whole the Harry Potter thing.
Yeah.
Obviously Harry Potter, full of magic. And Jackson has watched one of the Harry Potter movies and is very interested in watching the rest of them. And I'm not opposed to having him watch them at some point. The thing that concerns me the most about the Harry Potter stuff is not the magic piece of it. It's the becoming obsessed with the concept of revenge. Mm-hmm. But that's a side Harry Potter thing for another day. But the point is, we have talked to Jackson and used that opportunity to talk about, well, what do we think about magic? What does the Bible say about magic? And why does the Bible present magic as something that we need to stay away from?
So Colossians 2:8 says, see to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. So it's just one of those things where it's like, let's not be towing that line. Let's not be taken by deceit of magic. and just being very clear that, that we're not getting close to that dark forces line.
Yeah.
What?
I'd say, let's be super honest with our kids at an age-appropriate time, that there's a reason why Ouija boards are a thing.
Yeah.
And it's not magic. It's that there are demonic forces around us. I mean, we see the physical world, but the Bible's very clear that there's a spiritual battle that rages around us, maybe probably even in this very room.
Right.
And so, for us to attempt to tap into something that is much greater than we are. I mean, you look back at the story of Job, and while he had to get God's permission, Satan, who's only an angel, right? Let's never forget, he's not a god, he's an angel. Mm-hmm. He was able to take everything from Job.
Right.
I mean, we're not evenly matched.
He could do everything except kill Job.
That's right. And that was only because the Lord told him he couldn't.
Right. But he could have. Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
So why would we want to commune with those types of spirits? And so often magic is really just inter-spirit dimensional communication masked as something fun.
So we don't want to give our kids the idea that magic is something to be played with or anything like that. So we don't do things that, like Elf on the Shelf. I know it's innocent, but I don't want my kids to think that there is some magic going on, that that the elf goes to sleep during the day and then moves itself, and all that sort of thing, that this stuffed thing actually is magically coming to life.
Yeah, and no condemnation. I mean, I know there's a lot of people that do the Elf on the Shelf, and
again, this is where we landed based on God's convictions in our lives.
That's right. So please don't. We don't want to be dogmatic with this. Other than, here's what I do want to be dogmatic about. If you're just doing it because that's what people do and we've never really talked about it, I would challenge you on that. Mm-hmm. Like, spend some time thinking about, where does the Lord fall on that, and then go from there.
Right. So all those, we'll kind of tie this magic into the Santa part too.
Uh-oh. Are we going there right now?
But yeah, the magic thing we mostly stay away from in regards to Christmas.
That's right. So are we going there?
All right.
Are we doing this?
So the next thing that we're going to talk about is Santa.
Okay.
So I'll just give you some background. If you listen to some of our episodes, you'll know I was raised where Santa was never a thing. We just always, as kids, knew Santa wasn't real. We weren't allowed to tell our friends. That was a rule. But we never did my parents never pretended like he was, and then we had this moment where we realized, it was just, we just always knew Santa wasn't real.
Yeah.
It was just kind of part of the Christmas thing around us. And then Nathan was raised with Santa is real, and then at some point you have this coming of age where you realize this is not possible, and you have this aha moment,
Yep.
And then your life is ruined.
No, I don't think so.
Oh, I guess not.
But man, we had some fairly serious arguments early on in our marriage, which was just butt stupid because we didn't even have kids at the time. I don't know what we were doing. We were stupid when we were newly married.
We were.
But
we still are.
But over time, we've spent a considerable amount of time parsing through this. And so, again, just take this because it's fun. But, the history of Santa dates back, as you probably know, Saint Nicholas, mm-hmm. Which so he became a bishop in 280 AD. So it's about 230 years after the death of Christ. A little bit more than that. Excuse me, a little bit less than that. So he's early church, right? And the lore around Saint Nicholas, and I'm not calling it that to be demeaning, I'm calling it that because that's the story of Saint Nicholas, is that there were two sort of key stories with Saint Nicholas, Saint Nick. The first one is there was a father in the area of the world that he lived in, and the father had 3 daughters. And the 3 daughters were going to be forced into a life of prostitution if they couldn't come up with a significant amount of money. And the father, because he was a proud man, did not want to accept help from anyone. And so St. Nicholas, at great expense to himself, rounded up the money to be able to pay the dowry for these 3 daughters, and he essentially snuck over to the man's house and left him 3 little bags of gold. That was the money to buy off these 3 women so that they would not have to live a life of prostitution. The second story, which is a bit more fanciful, relates to a couple of kids that had been taken captive and had been tragically cut into little tiny pieces.
Oh my gosh!
And put in bags in the basement of the guy that killed them. And St. Nicholas snuffed out where they had been taken, went to that individual's house, and miraculously pieced these children back together and brought them back to life and brought them home to their family. Those are the stories of St. Nicholas. And so the Catholic feast of St. Nicholas was always celebrated on December 6th. Well, after the Protestant Reformation, 500 years ago, obviously it was not cool for the Protestants who had just reformed from the Catholic Church to continue celebrating the feast of a Catholic saint. And so they attempted to change the focus from St. Nicholas to Christ, to the baby in the manger. The problem is, a baby in a manger does not make a good story with regards to why gifts show up on December 25th, right? Which that was a big part of the celebration of St. Nick, is you'd put out a shoe, right? And it would get filled with candy and goodies in front of the front door to symbolize like that story where he dropped the gold for the 3 women. Well, that raises all kinds of questions for a kid. Right? How does baby Jesus get to my house? How does baby Jesus carry the things that he leaves for my house? This doesn't make any sense. And so because the gift, even back then, the gift giving had caught on.
Yeah.
Right? And so what had happened, and the other part, the little bit more insidious part of the celebration of St. Nicholas, is the sort of enforcement part of St. Nicholas was a character called Krampus, who there's horror movies and all sorts of silliness out about. But the story of Krampus was that he was a half demon, half goat character who showed up on December 5th, the day before the Feast of St. Nicholas, to see if you had been a good little boy or a good little girl. Sound familiar? And the way the original Germanic story goes, if you had been a bad little boy or a bad little girl, he would beat the snot out of you on December 5th, and then you would get nothing from St. Nick on December 6th. Go look it up. These are the stories. Because you had to have some reason to make the kids be good, right? Well, over time, right, of course, the idea of celebrating St. Nick that wasn't going to work because, we needed to move away. The reformers wanted to move away from the Catholic doctrine. And so particularly as they came over here, settled in the United States, that story began to be commercialized to our modern understanding of the jolly old St. Nick, Santa Claus. And so it is an overtly commercial invention around Christmas, but it's based on principles that were, surrounding St. Nicholas's life. Yep. So with that history in mind, how did you and I come to an agreement on Santa Claus?
So after several battles about Santa in our home,
before we had kids,
yes, we finally came to a point where we talked about some of the most important points about Santa. Like, I don't like the idea of lying to our kids. Right. And Nathan agreed. That doesn't make any sense for us. So what's
the danger of that? Like, let's not gloss over that. So, okay. So let's say we tell our kids, we really play it up, right? Santa, let's go see Santa Claus at the mall. Let's go, which by the way, our kids have done. Oh, right? Yeah. So this is not, again, there's no condemnation in this. We're just sort of talking back and forth to your benefit, hopefully. So what happens?
Yeah. So then if we've done the whole Santa thing up, then where does that end for them in their minds? When they realize Santa isn't real and mom and dad have lied to me and really played this up, what else have they lied to me about?
That's it.
So we felt like that was the danger in lying to our kids about Santa, was them wondering, well, then what other things are they not telling me the truth on?
Right. What about this whole Jesus thing?
Of course.
Like, is
that of course, the biggest.
True or not true?
Right. So we didn't want that. So we decided that we wouldn't lie to our kids. We would just kind of let their minds believe what they wanted in regards to Santa. And then as they asked us questions, we would kind of just take the Socratic, I'm going to ask you questions back, So is Santa real? Well, what do you think? And then they would probably say yes and why and all that. And I don't know. So that was one of the things is like, we don't want to lie to our kids because we don't want that to then ripple out into other things and them wondering, are we lying to them about the big things?
That's right. And
then we were able to kind of combine both of our upbringings with, he had the Santa thing and he loved it. And that was a great memory for him. But I also had this, like, I just always knew, and
you never felt like you missed out on anything.
And I never felt like I missed out on anything. And so we just kind of let our kids believe what they want to in regards to Santa and talk about it, and we just kind of ask them questions back.
Yep.
And then at some point, like with Jackson, he realized this probably doesn't actually.
This doesn't
probably
make sense.
Is not real. This doesn't make sense. And then when he would start asking us questions about, like, well, how can Santa? And we never were like, oh yeah, that's right, duh. We just let him noodle it out himself, and then he proudly came to a moment where he's like, oh, yeah, this can't be real, you know. And so for him, it wasn't like there was nothing crushed.
Right.
In his
he figured it out. It was an accomplishment.
Because he was like, oh, yeah, I figured it out.
Yeah.
That's not real. Well, that's okay.
Right. And to me, that reinforced what we want in our kids, which is, I want them to ask questions.
Yeah.
I want them to think about things at a more critical level. And I'll be honest, that includes with regards to Jesus.
Definitely.
And their relationship with him.
Definitely.
I want them to ask those questions.
Yep.
But I don't want them to feel like I'm hiding the ball because I want to manipulate them into being a good little boy or girl, right? I want them to ask the question because they're maturing and they're processing it. And maybe it won't work this way with all of our kids, but I'm super proud of the way that Jackson matured with regards to Santa Claus, because for a long time he was into it, and by into it I mean, like when it was Christmas, he'd talk about Santa, and if we saw Santa at the mall or whatever, he'd want to go over and tell him what he wanted for Christmas. But then he'd ask questions and we'd ask questions back, and you could see the wheels turning in his head, and that's what I want.
Right.
I want to encourage critical thinking in our children.
Absolutely.
And what better way than with regards to things like Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, the Easter Bunny, these sorts of fanciful things where they can figure it out on their own, most of them at a fairly young age, and I don't have to lie to them at all about those things.
Yep. Yeah, and so that's been the way that we do it. And really, your kids take on a lot of the way you handle things. So, like, we don't talk much about Santa and doing cookies. And, in fact, we rarely visit Santa just because we're not in malls and all that stuff very often. But some years we are, and it's great, and they love it. But some years they ask to set out cookies and milk, and some years they forget. So our kids just they don't seem to think about Santa all that much. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is, we were just talking about this before we started taping. Our younger kids think there is a Santa, but they don't get any gifts from Santa.
Yeah,
I don't think they even really realize that they don't get gifts from Santa.
Yeah, we don't do like the gifts under the tree not until Christmas Eve that are from Santa. Yeah. We don't do any of that. I mean, we set up our stockings overnight on Christmas Eve.
So they might think that their stockings are from Santa. I don't know, but they know they don't get any gifts from Santa, but I don't think they even really think about it. So it's just
like
one
Santa's
of those.
a thing. It's a cultural thing at this point.
So it's just one of those things where, like, we don't make a big deal about them, so our kids don't make a big deal about them. And Yeah, that works
Right.
for us.
So one other thing I think it's important for us to talk about with regards to Santa Claus, and that's the pressure to perform. So
Yeah.
talk a little bit about the danger of that, babe.
Yeah, right. So we, of course, want to teach our kids obedience. And we're, throughout the whole year, not just at Christmas time, teaching our kids lessons in obedience.
Yeah.
And, they're rewarded and disciplined for obedience and disobedience, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But what I really hope to instill in my children what I really hope that they learn from the Lord is obedience out of love for Christ, and not obedience out of fear of consequences or hope for something good.
Yeah.
So as just people in general, my prayer for them is that they desire to do good and be obedient to the Lord because they love him and they know that his best for him is what they want.
Yeah.
And not because they'll get gifts or they won't get gifts and they'll get coal or somebody's watching them to check off their list as nice or naughty.
Yeah.
So I want them to be obedient just out of love for the Lord, and I also want them to know that they'll get gifts whether they're naughty or nice, because that's sort of an example of God's gift to us.
Yeah.
In the gospel. His gift of salvation to us doesn't matter who we are. He gives his gift equally to all of us. And so the Christmas giving of gifts is like, you could be the naughtiest boy or girl throughout the whole year and I'm still going to love you just the same, and I'm still going to give you the same number of gifts I would have otherwise, just because I love you and you don't have to earn these, you just have to accept them.
That's right. To me, and I know we've probably buried the lead a little bit, but to me, this is the most dangerous part of the Christmas season as it currently is. It really sets up this idea in the minds of our kids that you need to be very careful how you live your life, because if you're not good enough, if you don't measure up, then you're not going to get this good thing. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to not put that then on God as a young person.
Right.
Where, okay, I know this is how Santa works, so I got to act a certain way. That's sort of how the world works. If I don't act a certain way, I get, in trouble. And so is that how God works? Like, I got to grind away, do the right stuff, be a good kid, be a good person so that God will accept me. And that is absolutely the opposite of what the gospel says is the truth of Christ.
Right.
We have been offered the free gift of salvation through faith in Christ, regardless of our works.
Yep.
Right? While we were still sinners, he died for us. I mean, it wasn't a matter of being nice or proving, that we deserve it. And if we're not really careful to kill that idea in the minds of our kids, I'm afraid that the modern Christmas concept can really stunt them in understanding a key reality about their relationship with Christ.
That's great. All right, so we have two more things to talk about.
Yeah, let's combine them up.
Yeah. So the last two things we want to talk about are celebrations and abiding in Christ. And we're going to kind of combine those two in one. So tell us a little bit about celebrations and how that goes along with abiding in Christ.
Right. So for on the celebration piece of it, we really did a good job, I feel like, of hitting on that earlier when we talked about feasts.
Yeah.
Celebrations are something that are very near and dear to the mind of God. He started it off right in the beginning, right? He celebrates right in the very first part of the Bible, celebrates rest, right? On the seventh day, he celebrates all that he had made in his creation. And so we see that consistent theme of celebrating the work of God around us. We see a celebration of the ways that God provided for his people, mandated throughout the Bible. If you attend a church that has communion regularly, and I hope that you do, I hope that they refer to that as, today we're going to celebrate communion. Mm-hmm. It's not taking communion, it's celebrating communion. Because what are we doing? When God had the cup and the bread, he said, do this in remembrance of me. It's a celebration of his communion with his disciples and ultimately with all of us through his death and resurrection. So that whole idea of a celebration is very biblical, and I think it's important for us to be able to pass that message on to our kids, that we celebrate. What are we celebrating this year? What things has the Lord provided for us that we can celebrate as a family? The second piece of that, though, and this really is the key for us in how we look at Christmas. You might be having listened to us in this episode and go, well, you guys didn't talk at all about how you tie things back into the baby in the manger or the birth of Christ or any of those things.
What's wrong with you?
And really, this is where we've landed on this, is we celebrate Christ and what he did for us, his birth, his life, his perfection, his resurrection, his sovereignty, his mercy, his love, his justice. We celebrate those things 365 days out of the year. And I don't say that to be cliche. I say that to tell you, as we talked back and forth about Christmas, we came to an understanding that if we're waiting until Christmas to celebrate the birth of Christ, we've blown it as parents.
Right.
Because that's the one day of the year where your kids aren't listening.
Right. They're thinking about gifts.
And just all of everything around family, and cool food and toys and all of that.
Yeah. So we came to a real peace in our family a couple years back where we realized, you know what? It's okay. We don't have a feeling like we need to ramrod Jesus's birth into Christmas, because we do celebrate Jesus' birth and all those things that Nathan said every other day out of the year too.
Right, as we study the Bible and pray.
And there are times throughout the year where we'll sing Christmas songs because they're about Jesus' birth, and we're celebrating that. Right. We're thinking about that. We're talking about that. So that's the mindset that we're in, and we're singing these Christmas songs to remember that. And Christmas carols and that sort of thing. So it's something that we get to live every other day out of the year too. And at Christmas, we don't feel like this heavy burden no, it's all about Jesus' birth. Well, not for us. It's not really. Christmas is, we talk about Jesus' birth because that's the time that the world seems to want to celebrate it. But Christmas for us is really a whole lot of other things.
Yeah.
It's all these things that we talked about.
Yeah.
Because that's just reality of the Christmas season.
That's right.
It's not really much about Christ's birth. It's about a lot of other really great things, and those are okay to celebrate those great things.
Right.
And we get to tie Jesus and the gospel into those really great things too.
Yeah, it frees you up really as a parent to enjoy that time free from the guilt of, okay, how am I going to grab my kids' attention and turn it back to the celebration of Christ and who he was as a human being here on earth. It frees you from that.
Yep.
Because, it's not, you talk about spiritual realms around us. It's not coincidental that the day where we try to really help our kids celebrate and understand their Savior coming to earth for them has the most noise going on around it.
Yeah.
That's one of those examples where the spiritual battle has bled over into the physical world around us, because Christ wants to be remembered, he wants to be loved, he wants relationship with our kids, and so Satan has taken this time of year when the world says we should celebrate that and created so much noise that it's almost impossible to really focus in on that.
And if you listen to last week's episode, you'll hear, there are things that we do. We try not to stay super busy around the Christmas season. We do try to de-stress and have time where we do get to talk about Jesus' birth and that gift to us.
That's right.
And really spend time celebrating the Lord and his works in our lives. But there's a lot about the Christmas season too that's just fun, and we enjoy that.
That's right. Man, guys, thanks so much for joining us. Went a little bit longer today, so we'll bounce on out of here. You guys tell us, right? Are we off? Are we crazy in the way that we think about Christmas? Are we crazy in the way that we think about Santa? Or, look, I know you elf on the shelfers are out there, right? If we just
and you're hating what I said right now. That's
stepped
right.
all over your toes, tell us, right? What are your thoughts on that, right? There's no dogmatism about this. You tell us what you think about it, how you and your spouse have thought about it, and where you landed on it. We'd love to know in the comments down below.
Our feelings.
That's right. Guys, if you're listening to us either on audio or video, please join us on Sunday evening. We will have our Marriage by Design live, and we will be talking about this very episode. Would love to have you join us and tell us what works for your family around the Christmas season. Guys, thanks so much for joining us. And remember, God is for your family.
Hey, thanks for joining us on Marriage by Design. If you were impacted by this video, like it by hitting the thumbs up below. Also, don't forget to subscribe, and once you subscribe, hit the bell icon so you can be notified when new episodes release.
Excellent. Also, one of the huge pillars of our show is interactivity between us and you. So we would love you to comment down in the comments below if you have thoughts about this video, or if you have questions or other things you'd like to see considered in the future. In addition, if you'd like, you can email us. That's marriagebydesignpodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Instagram @marriagebydesignpodcast, or you can find us on Facebook by searching Marriage by Design Podcast. Finally, if you want to, you can tweet at us. We do have a Twitter account that is @MarriageXDesign. Thanks, and have a great day.